Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today I have Amy Sedgwick of the Red Tent Sisters, co-founder, and she is a holistic reproductive health practitioner.
You got it.
Wow, okay. So today we're going to talk about a very important issue. We're going to be talking about birth control and the birth control pill, and specifically hormonal contraceptives as well. I see tons of people come into my office who have been on a birth control pill and their hormones are all over the place. They were never told the risks, and they've got other health issues because of it. So I looked up some stats on the US, actually that's all I could find, for birth control pill use. 62% of women. And also, I know in another resource that I often reference, breast cancer is at higher risk when you're on the birth control pill before the age of 20 or for 5 years consecutively before the age of 35. So let's get right into it and first talk about why someone might consider this form of birth control.
Sure. Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons, but the main one is, from my perspective, that we live in a society that kind of is used to taking a pill for whatever problem ails you, right? And we also live in a society where we tend to not understand our reproduction very well, and there's a huge fear around teenage pregnancy. That's seen as like a major sign of being irresponsible. And so anyone who wants to be responsible, they feel like this is really the only solution, right? On top of that, you have the issue that a lot of teenage girls, when they're going through, the years, from the first onset of menstruation, for the next 4 years, their endocrine systems are still maturing, and it takes a while. Things can be kind of all over the place, and I think we kind of live in a society where you're sort of expected to know exactly what's going to happen and be consistent, and the fact that periods are unpredictable, especially when they're sorting themselves out at that age, I think a lot of people don't like that, and they kind of want to suppress it and know exactly when to expect their period, which is what the pill gives you, is that sense of regularity. And then also, the North American diet, I don't have to tell you this, is horrible, and a lot of teenagers are eating in a manner that's horrible, and it really messes up their entire body and their hormonal system, and that gets reflected in their menstrual cycles. They might be experiencing polycystic ovarian syndrome, or fibroids, or heavy bleeding, and all of these symptoms that they just can't cope with, and doctors will prescribe the pill regularly for those kinds of things, not to mention, completely unrelated issues like acne.
Yes. So what you're saying is that when girls are getting the period for the first time, at what's the average age?
I don't actually know it offhand, but I think it's getting lower and lower, so I think it's like around 12 now.
Okay, so 12, 13, whenever. They're eating terribly, and two, it's a natural process for their body to actually not be regular.
Yeah, it can take about 3 to 4 years for a girl's endocrine system to fully mature.
Okay, so we've established now possibly why someone might take the birth control pill. What are the risks of actually starting to use that method as a birth control method? Or even to manage things like acne or just symptoms like cramping?
So there's a few issues. So one is, if a girl goes on it really young, like relative to when her first period was, then she doesn't actually undergo that maturation that we're talking about. So what I often see is women who, they were put on it 6 months to a year after they got their first period, and when they come off it later in their 20s or 30s, it's like their system never actually fully matures. So they're maybe wanting to get pregnant at this point, and they discover, oh my goodness, like my body doesn't even know how to ovulate properly. So that's a huge problem. Another problem is that, of course, all of those health issues that we were just talking about that a doctor might prescribe the pill for, it doesn't actually fix those issues. It just kind of like, masks all the symptoms and makes it look like everything's normal. And again, I don't have to tell you this, but it's kind of like this Band-Aid solution. So what happens is that all of those signs that your body's trying to tell you that something is wrong are being suppressed. So then when the woman comes off the pill, it's like, whoa, everything comes back with a vengeance, right? And not only that, but if a woman has been on it 10 years, you have 10 years worth of damage that's now accumulated before she's addressing it.
Wow. So with the pill, are there any other options? Because, this stuff is just given out like candy. A woman goes to the doctor, they want birth control, or they have these symptoms, or, they're just want it to be more predictable. And it's just, oh yeah, here, take the birth control pill.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is if we told men to take hormones for their acne, for birth control, or for whatever, for cramping, like, it would be ridiculous.
Yeah, my mentor likes to point out that this is the only situation in which people are systematically medicated for a non-condition. Like, it's not actually a condition except for femaleness. Like, you're basically being medicated for being a woman, right? But you're not sick. They're not sick people, but you're making them sick.
Right. Yeah, people don't realize that it's actually a drug that they're taking. It's hormones. And, what does the body have to do with all these extra hormones? Like, what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, so the consequences are huge. So we talked about one already, which is like breast cancer, so that can be an issue. But it also has been shown to actually affect libido. So the irony is that women's libido can go way down being on the pill. So it kind of makes it pointless being on the pill if you don't actually want to have sex.
Sure does.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of correlation between that and depression. So a lot of women come to see me because they say that the pill literally makes them feel like they're going crazy. And someone like my sister, for example, was put on it, the pill when she was in her mid-teens, and within 6 to 12 months was also put on antidepressants. And that's a really common story that I've heard among young women, is that there's a correlation between that, and there is some research evidence to support that as well. And then, of course, there's all the other risks associated with it. So blood clots being one of them. I had a client early on when I started my career who was in her early 30s, very active woman, and she traveled a lot. And once when she got off a plane, like, she nearly had a stroke, basically. And they said that they could not find any reason, because she was a super healthy woman aside from being on the pill, so she had to come off because it was literally a matter of life and death.
That's unbelievable. And just from my perspective, I know when clients come and see me and they're on specific drugs, I'm always looking for nutrient depletions that we need certain nutrients to actually detoxify a lot of these drugs. And we use up those nutrients a lot quicker. And with the birth control pill, estrogen and progesterone, we need B6, B12, and a bunch of other B vitamins, folic acid. And these nutrients are critical for brain health, for feeling happy, for feeling good, for having a libido. So it totally makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about what the alternative is. Is there an alternative, or does everyone just have to go on the birth control pill or hormonal contraceptive?
Yeah, absolutely not. So my work now is basically teaching women natural forms of birth control. So I teach something called the Gitalis method of fertility management. It's an approach to fertility awareness. And so fertility awareness is kind of like a bucket approach to fertility management or birth control. It's really looking at physiological signs on a day-to-day basis that tell a woman whether or not she is fertile on any given day. So a lot of people always think this is like the rhythm method. It's not. So the rhythm method or the calendar method, those are what we call, in this line of work, we call them retrospective methods. So they're kind of looking at past cycles, trying to predict future cycles, kind of like assuming that every woman's going to have a 28-day cycle, and then kind of trying to abstain around the time when we think a woman's going to ovulate. And those do not work very well. Like, a lot of people were conceived on that method, I think myself included. And the reason that they don't work very well is because women don't always have 28-day cycles. As I'm sure you know, like, they're very susceptible to change based on stress and illness and sickness and travel, and anything where your body says, I don't have the resources to get pregnant right now, I'm going to postpone ovulation because, it's clear that this body cannot handle pregnancy right now. And so because of that, cycle length will vary a lot, and so you can't assume anything about a woman's cycle based on previous cycles. So fertility awareness, in contrast, looks at, okay, based on physiological signs of my body, am I fertile today or not? So there's no prediction, there's no like looking back at what happened before, just based on what I know about my body today, am I fertile or not? And then a woman can make a decision based on that information. Okay, so I know I am fertile, so what do I want to do about that? I could abstain from vaginal intercourse completely. If I'm willing to take a little bit of risk, I might choose to use, a barrier method like condoms or diaphragms, so things that have fairly high levels of efficacy, but there's some level of risk involved. If she's trying to get pregnant, that would be a great day to try. So there's lots of choices around what you do at that point once you have that information. And one of the things that I love is when a woman has that information, or when a couple have that information, then when something goes wrong, like a condom breaks or it slips off, you actually know, okay, what is my risk today? And so a woman could maybe choose to take the emergency contraceptive pill if, you know, something happened and it was on a highly fertile day. But if it was on an infertile day, then you might not bother, right? So it can really be informative and used in a variety of different ways depending on the situation.
I love that because, you know, I'm all about empowering people to listen to their body. And I always say that symptoms are the language of the body.
Exactly.
And if you listen to them and know what they're saying, they can tell you everything you need to know.
Absolutely.
So that's fantastic. Just to backtrack a little bit, is the birth control pill 100% efficacious for birth control?
No. No. I believe the perfect use is something like 99.8, but in typical use, it's down around the 97-98% range. So it does happen. You know, all sorts of reasons. So I've heard of cases where, you know, women were forgetting to take them, or maybe they were drinking and they vomited it up, or they were sick and they vomited the pill up, so that can be a cause. But I've also heard of cases where there's just a completely unknown reason why it failed. And method fat failure happens with, I've seen every single method fail, and I've seen every single method work to some extent. And there's some of it, there's very clear reasons why, like with a condom breakage, and other times I've had clients use condoms perfectly with no evidence of breakage or slippage, and still a pregnancy occurs. So you never know. Some of it's just mystery.
Okay. In the Justice method, that's the one you teach, right?
It is, yeah.
What is the efficacy of that?
So in perfect use, studies have shown symptothermal methods like the Justice method to be between 99.4 and 99.6% effective. In the studies that were done, they're often worse than user error. So the user error, I think the efficacy was down around 98.6%. So when they corrected for that, and they took those out, then the efficacy was up around 99.6. So it's very similar to the pill.
So it's around the same?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're giving up all these risks and extra hormones and extra pressure on our body for none of that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We just have to get to know the body a little bit more.
Yeah.
When someone does come off the birth control pill or hormonal contraceptive,
Yeah.
and I say or hormonal contraceptive because we know there's the NuvaRing,
There's the NuvaRing.
there's the IUD with progesterone,
Yeah.
and I think there's some other things out there.
Depo-Provera, the shot.
Right, that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, when they come off of that, how long does it take for their body to come back into balance and for that cycle to come back into a regular cycle?
Great question, and I get this question all the time from people who are thinking of coming off, because that's the first thing they want to know, right? And I wish I could give a straight up answer, but I've seen everything from, you know, a woman bounces back within the first month to clients where it's taken 2 years. They are starting to do some research on this. The most recent published research that I saw on this said 9 months is the average that it takes to get back to like regular ovulation and regular cycles.
Okay. And do you have any idea what females are told that is normal when they go on it?
Most doctors tell their patients to come off 3 months before they plan to get pregnant.
3 months?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so it does take some time for the body to re-educate itself.
Yeah, and I get very concerned about that statistic, you know, that it takes 9 months, because what I see is women coming off the pill expecting things to go back to normal quickly, and they don't know anything about fertility and trying to get pregnant, so they just start trying right away, thinking it's going to happen, and it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. By the time they get to the 9-month mark and it still hasn't happened, their stress levels around it are so high that that becomes a compounding factor affecting their fertility. And here in Canada, usually referral to a fertility clinic happens after 1 year of trying. So it's very easy to get to that 1 year mark and think that there's something hugely wrong and end up in a fertility clinic where you might undergo a battery of testing that can be extremely invasive and stressful, and then it kind of like this snowball effect. So for me, it's really important that women know that and that they plan well ahead of time. Like if you are not ready to come off the pill or it doesn't feel right for you now, to at least plan that when you want to start a family, you give yourself like a good year at least.
Great piece of advice. And I'm really happy you brought the stress piece up. Do you know why people have hormonal issues when there is a lot of stress in their life?
Well, I do know some things because I've studied with you.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, with cortisol, basically, your stress hormones will affect the sex hormones in your body because they get converted, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean,
and
yeah, go ahead.
it will also, when I was mentioning earlier about irregular cycles, basically what happens is if the woman's body is gearing up to ovulate, so saying I'm expected to ovulate in a week, when stress happens, it actually signals the ovary to shut down because it says this is not a good time to ovulate and get pregnant because the body can't handle it. It's in the fight or flight mode, right? So when you're in the fight or flight mode, this is not a good time to be getting pregnant because your body needs so many additional resources. So it will actually postpone ovulation.
That's very interesting that the body actually does that and sort of innately has a mechanism to stop impregnation if the environment's dangerous. And so stress is something that really exacerbates everything. And I've even heard stories where women are trying to get pregnant and then they just stop and give up and not care, and that's when they get pregnant.
Absolutely, you hear that all the time. Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit beforehand too about how some people are actually a little bit apprehensive about learning so much about their body.
Yeah.
So I mean, my perspective is I think people should know as much as they can about their body to empower them.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit on that?
I can, yeah. So when a woman starts to chart her cycle, she'll start to notice all sorts of different things that affect her cycle. So when I first started charting, I discovered I had a thyroid issue because of my low temperatures. Charting temperature is part of this method. I discovered I had food allergies because I was getting this like chronic non-peak, what we call non-peak mucus, so like yellow pasty, which is actually a sign of inflammation. So it turned out I had allergies that I was not aware of. So great information to have, but it can also be kind of scary when you suddenly realize like all these choices that you've been making throughout your life, so whether it was the choice to go on the pill in the first place, you know, the choice to eat in a particular way, the choice to put work ahead of your health, that those are all showing up in your chart as a reflection of your health. And it's a lot to face. And I think that a lot of women experience shame around their choices, a lot of regret. I hear women tell me all the time, like, if I had known that this is what it was going to do to my body, I wouldn't have made this decision. So there's a lot of guilt, a lot of regret, a lot of remorse and sadness about some of those choices. And so a woman needs to be ready to face those. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so in terms of what you know, the people might learn from charting, we talked about thyroid.
Yeah.
We talked about diet and how those lifestyle choices might affect the hormones. And I think, you know, we have certain things that feed back to us. Like, you know, I speak a lot with my clients about bowel movements and how much you can learn from that. It's like a status report every day. And I think a lot of women look at the menstrual cycle as like this annoying thing that happens. But it's really the opposite. It can be empowering, and we can totally flip that around. And, you know, guys don't even have the chance for every month to get a status report on how their diet and lifestyle is treating them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and things like cramps, you know, also can indicate, you know, imbalances with, you know, minerals and vitamin deficiencies, or even just emotional issues around what it means to have a period. A lot of women had horrible experiences of their first period, and it's almost like that those emotions get re-triggered during the menstruation, so those have to be addressed and looked at as well.
A lot of the symptoms associated with the menstrual cycle, which is often referred to as PMS, is often treated with these birth control methods. So is PMS normal? Is it abnormal? Like, to what extent? Like, what should people expect from that?
I like to look at PMS in two different ways. So a colleague of mine likes to refer to it as premenstrual signs rather than premenstrual syndrome. It is very normal to experience a difference in your mood and your energy and all of that premenstrually because of the difference in what's happening with your hormones at that time. So I like to kind of teach women that it's good to think about yourself as like having 4 different phases, almost like the moon. So, you know, the estrogenic time around the time of ovulation is a time when women naturally, because of their hormones, are more outgoing. They want to be social, they have a higher libido. That's all normal because of what's happening from the perspective of physiology. And premenstrually, same thing. Your body physiologically is preparing to nest an embryo. And so there tends to be a lot more inward energy. I've noticed a lot of women feel like they want to be home more, they don't feel as social. There's this real emphasis on kind of nesting and going sort of internally and reflecting on things. And I think a lot of the reason that women experience that as a time of tension is because our society doesn't really honor that, right? We are expected to be high producing, highly social, highly active all the time. And our society doesn't really honor the need for times of rest, right? And going inward and all that. And so a lot of my work is about helping women to reframe that experience. You know, if you are feeling a bit more moody, well, maybe you need to reflect on what it is that needs to be released. You know, is there something that's not working in your life that you maybe need to release or change how you're doing it? Or is there something that is not working with your partner that you maybe need to communicate? But finding ways to do that in a productive way rather than trying to suppress it. And then when you suppress it, it just comes out as like a, you know, a rage or like all these things that women associate with, you know, being like horrible PMS because they're suddenly exploding in their feelings. But I feel like it's often because they're trying to suppress it. They're not honoring that experience. But then on the flip side of that, because there are so many hormonal imbalances in our society with how we're eating and our menstrual cycles and, you know, all of the exogenous sort of estrogens that we're trying to process, there can be legitimate issues that come up in terms of hormonal imbalances that might cause extreme symptoms, in which case, you know, those would be best addressed, you know, through working with someone like myself or yourself to kind of bring those hormones back into balance so that they don't feel so out of control.
Cool. And is that what the Red Tent was all about?
Yeah,
years ago?
So,
tell me a little bit about that
sure.
And the name of your business.
Yeah, so Red Tent Sisters, we did name it after the book The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, and in that book she kind of reframes the whole idea of menstruation as being kind of this sacred time when women would menstruate together, and you know, the idea being that they used to cycle with the moon, so all the women would menstruate at the same time, and that it was a time of rest. Like literally they would pre-prepare all the food so that they didn't have any work to do, and they would all be, you know, in this tent together sharing wisdom and stories and just, you know, being with their bodies. So it was kind of the idea of a sacred time for women to rest. And yeah, and then I opened the business with my biological sister, so that was part of it, and the idea of sisterhood. So really the concept of our business was to kind of try to recreate that safe space for women to explore, you know, those times of rest and, you know, change our relationship to menstruation, but also honor the different phases of womanhood. So, you know, what it means to get your first period and to make that a sacred thing rather than this horrible thing that happens, and then to honor what it is to become a mother. That's also a sacred rite of passage. And then also the sacred rite of passage of losing your period and what it means to become a wise woman and to start to care for the other women in your life.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So what would you tell someone, a female, whatever age they might be at, who's currently on a hormonal contraceptive? What would be maybe your 2 or 3 words of advice on where to go from here?
Where to go from here? Well, I have a report called the Ditch the Pill report that I like to encourage people to download and read. So it shares more about my personal experiences and, you know, the symptoms that I had and the horrible side effects and kind of my journey. So I think it helps people to kind of connect with their own experience and some of the risks to look out for. My primary goal really is that women be informed about that decision. You know, you might learn all this information and still decide if the pill is right for you. I always want to honor what's best for my clients. But it's really important to me that women be more informed around this, so that's a great place to start. Or do your own research about, you know, some of the risks involved with the pill, and also depending on your own risk factors. Like they have shown that there's a protective effect of the pill on certain other types of cancers. So I think it's ovarian, for example. So if you're at high risk, that might be a consideration, right? So you really just want to look at your own situation, and I truly believe that the answer of what's right for us is always in the body. So just checking in with your intuition. You know, is this something that you feel you want to give up in your life? And then you also want to check in with your body. Okay, is this something I feel ready to do now? And if it's not, you know, what do I need to do as the next step to maybe support me to get there? And if I am ready to take that step, then time to get some support.
That's great advice, and I think it's great to point out that if you're on it, you're neither bad nor good, you just are, and you have to figure out what's best for you.
I used the pill for 10 years, so I want people to know that I'm not judging that decision. I mean, I did the exact same thing. I had horrible periods in my teens, and I was put on it without knowing the risks involved. You know, so I absolutely have no judgment. It's very much a thing that I'm hoping will change systemically, but you know, it exists in our society that these are being tossed out like candy kind of to teenagers, and we can't blame, you know, women for taking the advice of doctors who they've been trained or told they need to trust, right?
Yes, and there is another way.
Yeah, there is another way.
Yes, okay. So thank you so much for joining me today. I think this is a super important topic to get out there to more people, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
And where can people find you?
They can find me at red10sisters.com.
Great, red10sisters.com. And if you found this information valuable, or you know someone who would find this valuable, please share it with them. And if you want any more information or more videos like this, please go to joshgitalis.com. The best way to get started is to get started.